In this episode, we're going to broach the tough topic of, is it sensory or is it behavior? We're going to explore some of the research and learn from the mistakes that I've made as an OT, decide which questions to ask ourselves as parents to really understand the why behind behavior, and then I'm going to suggest some practical tips and next steps as you consider how to apply this knowledge to your own kids and your own homeschools. So, if you've been homeschooling for any length of time or even researching homeschooling, it's likely becoming pretty clear that there's an abundance of resources, right? I call this the blessing and also the greatest hardship of homeschooling. If you've been parenting for any amount of time, you also find that there is no shortage of books on parenting. There is no shortage of people telling you what to do about parenting. Though interestingly, parenting did not become a verb form until even the 1950s, according to Merriam-Webster dictionary. Let's just let that sink in for a second. Until the 1950s, people literally did not even think of this role as an action. Sorting through, interpreting, and applying all of this information can be daunting, frustrating, lead to emotions of guilt and fear. So I'm here to tell you there's not one right way to parent or even to home educate. But we can all ask questions. And recently, I've had more and more parents coming to me saying, like, my child fights me with everything that I suggest, or every response to no ends up in a physical anger response. Is this fight or flight, meaning that it's an automatic nervous system response? Is it sensory overwhelm, also impacting the nervous system, or are they being manipulative? Some of these parents say that they've had to read about removing the no to help their kids connect, but something just doesn't feel right about that. Some say they push back with discipline, but something just doesn't feel right about that. And some parents say that they've sought help only to be told that their kids couldn't even participate in OT because of their quote unquote behavior. So I need to pause there for a second. The very same person whose literal job description is to help a person participate in what they need and want to do is saying, nope, you can't participate in therapy. Now, it would be really easy for me to be disgusted by that situation, yet I was literally that therapist in 2008 when I first started practicing as an OT. I vividly remember telling a family that they needed to start with a psychologist or psychiatrist because their child's behavior was interfering with therapy. What I should have said is, I'm to blame. I don't know enough to be the best support for you now as a new therapist, and then commit to doing the research or help them find a therapist that was knowledgeable enough to support them. So, to that family in Columbia, Maryland, I'm sorry. I've thought about you so many times over the years. And as I said at the beginning of this podcast, I'm an avid reader, I'm a long learner, and I do better now. But so, what does that better mean? Well, it means asking questions to spur my own learning as I support families to apply at home with their kids. So, all right, so let's get back. Let's go back to that scenario where a parent comes to me and says, my child is so angry and won't participate in school. So, phrased a little differently, it's been said, my child will only, XXX or XY, whatever, fill in the XXX with whatever that activity of choice seems to be, meaning they're only going to do what they're specifically choosing. So it's really important to recognize that you, the parent or the expert in your child, it is also okay to ask questions, to play detective, and help support you so then you can support your child. When we go through these asking questions, it's not questioning with judgment. That's a really important clarification to make with your children as well. So we've already talked about the privilege of homeschooling and that we can individualize our environments and activities throughout the day for our specific kids. And as we go through this, next section of thought where I'm going to share some questions and resources, it's also important to say this detective work, or again, asking questions, looks different if you've already gone through some testing to receive a diagnosis, or someone hopefully has worked with you to play detective. OTs do not diagnose. That's not our role. We look at function. So, is a child able to participate in what they need and want to do, or an adult able to participate in what they need and want to do? A diagnosis is as helpful as the doors it opens and the information that it provides. Many times, the detective work provided by a diagnosis helps us to support differently. And supports aren't always based differently on a diagnosis. But for example, if someone comes to me saying that they have an autistic child with a PDA profile, my thinking is going to be more in tune to their nervous systems, their intrinsic motivations, and collaboration. In other words, we want to match their strengths. .org.uk has really great information sheets explaining that PDA. It's also important to note that though the term PDA, or pathological demand avoidance, was originally coined in 1983 by Elizabeth Newson, but we are very much still learning about this. In fact, as this is airing in February of 2024, PDA is recognized as an autistic profile, but not yet recognized in America as a diagnosis or even a subtype of autism. And in addition, some autistic adults prefer PDA to mean pervasive drive for autonomy, and most research of this prevalence is being done in the UK. All right, so let me back up. Let's go back to these questions. We're going to assume that a parent is not asking this question already equipped with knowledge of the PDA profile in their child. Okay, so my first question is going to say, describe what that refusal looks like to me. The point of asking is for a parent to notice if there's any trends. So, is this refusal different in different settings? Is there a time of day that's more consistent? Do you notice triggers before? Do you notice something after? And how does your child calm after this refusal? Based on those answers, my next question is going to be, what have you tried so far? Because goodness gracious, we do not need to spend time retrying all the things that you've already practiced or you've already tried, pretending that, I as an OT have some magic remedy to how your home is functioning. Instead, we're going to begin to look at these resources and recommendations. So in another scenario, or, even the same one, many parents talk about this fight, flight, freeze response. There's so many stories, glimpses you've heard on social media talking all about fight, flight, and freeze. So let's start with defining some terms. So bear with me, I'm going to nerd out for a bit about the neuroscience. I do think it's important to recognize the complexity of what can be happening within a refusal, even if we try to simply explain it here with this fight, flight, or freeze. So according to Harvard research, yes, I did look it back up and even found it again in my Netter's Atlas, which, side note, still smells like a cadaver lab even after all these years. So if you happen to be a therapist listening, I'm sure you have that, lovely memory of that smell. All right. So when a stimuli, meaning something coming in through either our eyes, our ears, our nose, mouth, or body, or all of it, we send the information to the amygdala. So the amygdala, it's an almond-shaped structure in the brain. It's involved in processing emotions. And there's two, one on each side of hemisphere, one on each hemisphere of the brain, both located kind of near the base. There, the amygdala interprets, and when it perceives danger, instantly sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. So the key word here is perceives. This means the threat is different for different people. So there is a great picture book on this topic called Poppy and the Overactive Amygdala, if this is something that your kids might value. It's linked in the show notes. So once the hypothalamus activates, we have what we call the HP axis, which is the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal gland. And the hypothalamus activates the pituitary gland, which then releases hormones to activate the adrenal gland. All right, so we went through all of those, right? The adrenal gland then releases cortisol, and the cortisol hormones then sets other organs in the body to activate, such as muscles. It increases breathing, it increases your heart rate, and then it tells this person to fight, to run away, or to freeze exactly in that moment. So let's back up for a second. You can tell this is all automatic, right? This is not a person saying, hey, let's refuse, let's get angry, let's jump in and make some choices here. No, it's an automatic response. Okay, so then a different part of the brain, the frontal lobe, is where your emotional control center is. It helps to regulate the amygdala and to calm the body. It's also the spot where this hot topic of executive functioning occurs, and we'll be talking about that in lots of future episodes. All right, so let's just take an example here. Someone knocks on the door. So we take that stimuli, obviously, in through our ears. And in my house, then the dog begins barking and running with his hair standing on edge. I mean, he looks vicious. This combined stimuli, so the dog barking, the doorbell ringing, it automatically goes to the amygdala, which then begins to activate our body. So again, our heart rate's going up a bit, our breathing is slightly faster. We get to the door and we see, hence the Amazon guy with, the package that we're looking for. So, yahoo, our frontal lobe fires back. We begin to calm back down. There's no threat. However, some people whose executive functioning in the frontal lobe is not yet developed, they would probably feel like my dog did in that moment. Hair on end, high alert, and then recognize it's not as easy to calm right back down. So, clearly, this is a brief explanation, and there's actually a really great article for kids on this on kids.front.org, and I'm going to go ahead and link that in the show notes as well. All right. So, what exactly do we do with this? And Sarah, what does this have to play in with our school refusal or, even refusal to help set the table or whatever it is that we need to have happen in our home? Well, I think we can all agree that we don't want our kids looking at school tasks or as learning in general as a perceived threat. We would rather think of it as the exciting Amazon guy. So I think there is another term that we do need to define before we go into the next steps, which is authority. And I'm saying this because the number one platitude that I see on social media or hear from parents is connect first or follow their lead, and this all goes away. Yes? Anyone? And I will tell you that when we began homeschooling and I was trying to find my footing, figure out what we were doing, someone told me to give up my authority and follow their lead. And I said, what the heck does that mean? It sent me into a tailspin because I was all in on natural learning throughout our day, and I still am. But I also recognize that as a parent, I'm responsible for their health, for their safety, and to support them to be the best person that they can be. So, all right, I've looked up the definition of authority. Webster's defines it as the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. So, by that definition, the power struggle is real. And are there times when I need to be an authority? Yep. You bet. When I yell stop or I scream it because a car is literally coming to kill you, then yes, simply by the nature of development, I'm able to scan the environment and search, identify, predict, decide, and evaluate. AKA SIPT parenting. So thank you, Mr. Larson, my driver's ed teacher circa 1996 for that acronym that I still remember to this day. But, all right, but that authority requires trust and not power. So to build that trust, we need to have a mutual understanding and a baseline. So when my kids were little, that trust came from me co-regulating with them. I literally remember my daughter, she's 15, but then a few months old, she's screaming and screaming. I've rocked her. I've tried everything. I put her on top of the washing machine because she loved that. Tried swaddling, feeding, walking up and down the steps. Guys, no joke. I had the most fit quads when my baby was tiny because she would calm down when I was walking up and down the stairs. But I remember one night in my completely exhausted state, and I was beginning to feel really frustrated to the point where I was like, I've got to walk away. I laid her down in her crib and I was about to walk away to gather myself. And instead, and almost to convince myself, I just kept repeating, I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. She was in her crib. I was not touching her, but just repeating it over and over and over. And she calmed down. So looking back, it's not actually because she calmed down to my words, though the repetitive words were probably soothing, but it's because I calmed down. And when I calmed my own nervous system, it helped her too. This is co-regulation. When they were toddlers, it was modeling deep breathing, which is also one of the ways to help calm the amygdala. It was being sure that they were exposed to coping skills like the heavy work of climbing and crawling and carrying, holding their hands, helping them out of a fight flight response when that happened. And as they've grown older, now it's answering more of their questions of why. Sometimes it's even explaining who my authority is on in the subject. In our home, it's frequently asked and said, cite your source. So by this point, I'd like to acknowledge you have been stuck through some history of terms, some brain science, some grammatical definitions. If you go back and write a narration, maybe look up some statistics on PDA, and you've completed pretty much your entire homeschool day. But we haven't yet helped with the what do I do? So, as we go through this podcast each month, we're going to target a specific topic. I'll talk to you about ways to help the person, which in this case is how do we help to calm the nervous system so that this is not helping. And a fellow OT/homeschool mom, Kim Hazelton, is going to join me in on the next episode to talk more about what OTs can do in the clinic to help with this, not a therapist who's going to show their inadequacy like I did way back in the day. We're going to talk about the environment and what are ways that we can set up the day to help. We're going to talk about different occupations that may help to promote a calmer nervous system in general. But today, I want to encourage you to think about this in terms of before, during, and after whatever it is that you're asking your child to do. Before an activity where you personally see a reason for it to be an assignment. Now, I need to stop here again because I ask myself why on lots of things, and it's not always the answer you would expect. Like, for example, right now, my son and I are reading a book. We're working through logic together. And I asked myself, why? Like, what is the actual purpose of this assignment today? And why do I want you to learn this? And there's a lot of times I will say, I'm not sure. And then we can scrap it together, or we can say, what help can this provide you in the future? Or how is this building into something? And I notice when we work through those answers together, the willingness to participate as well as the attention as we're going through definitely increases. So also, if you are now personally seeing a reason for this to be an assignment. So number one, be sure your child is as regulated as possible. You might say, Sarah, what on earth does regulated mean? So in this instance, all right, I want you to think about times in your day when you're really sluggish, maybe after you eat or first thing you wake up in the morning. Is that the time of day that you really should be focused in on something that's really hard? Now, for me, yes, like I wake up in the morning, I'm ready and raring to go, but not for everybody. However, there are times like when you are in, we call it the zone of optimal alertness. Like when you are in it, you are showing me that you are focused. Maybe your breathing is slower. Maybe it's their eye contact is typical for them. Notice I am not saying their eye contact is great, that they're looking right at me, because that is different for different people. But you know your child. Is their voice typical? Is it higher or lower? Are they speaking really fast or just like looking away and totally groggy, right? So we want to know, are they as regulated as they can be? Have they eaten? Have they drank recently? Maybe you even have them take their pulse and count their breathing, because this information does not hurt. In fact, it can help with interoception or understanding what's going on internally in your body. So if they aren't regulated, start there. Heavy work, tune into your bodies. Maybe it's that you need to go outside. Now, again, I'm going to back up because Sarah, heavy work, right? We are not, I don't own a barn, right? Not asking my kids to really do heavy farm work, things like that. That's not what I mean by heavy work, which is a term that you will likely hear frequently. What I'm meaning is things that are going to push or pull into your joint. It's going to increase your proprioception, or the information through your body, through your joints, your muscles, your ligaments. So it might be crawling, it might be pushing, it might be pulling. Anything that gives you more awareness to your body. If you think about when you are stressed out, or at least when I'm stressed out, one of the things I like to do is cuddle up in a big blanket. That in itself is increasing proprioception. It's giving me awareness in my body because it's deep pressure there. Okay. So if they aren't regulated, start there with that heavy work. And then Also, explain your reasoning in simple terms. So let's go back to the example I was given earlier when I said with my son, I'm thinking to myself, why actually am I doing this? Why are we reading a tough book now full of information? And hmm, when I notice that he doesn't understand something, he starts to breathe faster. He's shaking his foot. He's often looking away from me and can't narrate back to me what we've heard. So, again, we've talked about the choice of dropping this, of saying, is this actually necessary? But we've also talked about that his co op is discussing this book on Mondays when they're together, and he's going to feel those same symptoms if he can't participate in that group. So for him, that actually is important right now. It has value. So we've decided like reading this book in small little excerpts every day, small bursts, and trying different note taking strategies is going to help. So that is an example of let's explain why we're doing what we're doing. All right, so that's all before and during. Again, pay attention to those same physical symptoms. If you have to stop, stop. Again, you are gaining trust. I would try physical work to calm the body and then come back to what you're doing. A very simple completion to prove that you can persevere. So I'm not saying come back and we're going to finish this entire chapter when it's something that's hard, but maybe come back and have something that's going to last 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, right? Example, there was a time when the same son, when writing was awful, was really hard. In actuality, it kind of still is, but we would set an amount. Like I would put a literal piece of paper over top of how much I wanted him to write. And most of the time he would decide that. So I would say, this is something that you've shared with me. Your words are really important. Now, I want you to copy them into your commonplace journal, or whether it's something that we're, turning in a nature journal, whatever it was that we needed him or why we needed him to write. We would decide together how many of those lines it was. But if in the middle he started to get really frustrated, we would stop together, literally do push ups. No joke. Like if I'm doing it with him, I'm going to do the push ups too. And then return back to show him, what, breaks are not bad, especially breaks with heavy work, but that you can still persevere when we're done. So then we would celebrate as we came back. All right, so let's think about that's before and during. Let's think about after. So we want to process what went well and what didn't. So did the breaks really help? Did they not? Was it awful? Do we need to kind of scrap this whole thing? But remember, you're doing this together, you're collaborating, you have removed that power element. And number two, then be open to new ideas. It's kind of amazing, what kids will suggest, what they'll say if they recognize that someone is listening to them. And then, so that's before, during, and after. So let's think about all the time. Read, 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 read together. Read novels, read short stories, read picture books. I don't care. But let these book characters sit on their hearts. And sometimes ask about the demands that those kids have faced. Ask about their problem solving skills, their coping skills. What do you think about that? What do you think about what Brian did in Hatchet? What do you think about the main character in Sweet? How did those characters solve their problems? How did they persevere? Oftentimes, it's easier to pick something out in another person than it is in yourself. Then also, let's talk more about authority. Like, talk about the authority in the book characters' lives, and compare their reactions to your children's. And again, we're going to ask questions, not question, right? A big difference with judgment. So maybe talk about the cause and effect that they're having there. All right. So clearly, there is a lot of verbal processing in this, and these asking questions and waiting for answers and responses. So for those of you saying, all right, my child is not that verbal, I get it. So what can you apply to their developmental stage? Is that you're modeling this physical movement, modeling the deep breathing? Remember, I talked about co-regulation even with toddlers. And if you need to stop in the middle of washing dishes and do something because you feel like you can't persevere, or you just want to model for your kids, or you stop in the middle of I don't know, sweeping or baking or whatever occupations that you do just to model these actions and then go back so that you persevere. Model that deep breathing, saying, man, I am frustrated. And again, then you're modeling sharing your emotion and you're modeling a coping skill all at the same time. If you need more help in taking this apart to apply to your homeschool, there is the OT is in membership. It's a group where we have weekly office hours to process through these scenarios together. We also have a monthly book club because, as I've shown here, I am on a continuous quest for knowledge to help you and support you to artfully apply to your own homeschool. So, in our next episode, we're going to talk to Kim Hazelton more about the role of OT in a clinic to support you and your child in regulating their nervous systems. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for being here.